Alrighty, so Rio here, and I have finished grading your week 4 Learn Together, and about half of you got it of those who attempted it. So what I want to do is go over an example just to clarify, because this idea of get hack is really only so you can see the output. Everyone that I looked at said it didn't work. They actually didn't have the code right inside their page. So I get it, right? So it takes a little bit to have all those things flow in. And I know that at least one student last night attempted it, asked for help, and was able to help them. And, that's the key is that, and this is why I suggest working on stuff early, but, no matter how many times I say it, I get that it hits up against your schedule and you just have to figure that out. But coding does require you to look at something, give it some thought, maybe rest away from it a little bit, and then come back and look at it. And honestly, just reach out for help when you need it. So, you know, I try to make myself as available as I can. So hopefully you'll take advantage of that. I've seen a handful of you in my office hours, which is awesome. I hope to see some more of you. Hopefully you see that it's beneficial to come get help. So the objects idea, I just want to show you like a simple object, right? So here is an object, right? So an object is a primitive, and this is a data type inside of JavaScript that holds data and can hold methods. Okay, now in the way that I did my example, I actually showed both methods, which are just functions inside of here, but I also showed it to where I just created functions outside that use the data within here. Okay. But the key was whatever you implemented as far as objects, you still needed to output your whatever it was your code was doing to the web page. Now, what this really brings up too is that we're moving to Dev 1. So having your code accomplish a specific task is important. And really, at this point, we should see very little code standalone setting out on global space. So if I see an if block and stuff like that, I'm probably going to say, and I believe I said this last week, like that could be a function, because you really want to have almost everything contained in objects, methods, or functions. And where you do need some global variables, cool, set some up, and you do need to use those for the dev 0. But most of your stuff really should be setting in a function and have a concise related function. Like sometimes one of the things I saw was that the code up at the top of the JavaScript and the code at the bottom wasn't really connected, didn't really have any relationship. So when you create an app, they need to have a relationship. So that's one of the things you got to think about as we move into Dev 1, Dev 0. Okay, so in this example, hopefully by seeing this code, you're like, yep, I get that. So how do I then take this example and just output it into a web page, right? Well, there was two things. One, create an index page, link your JavaScript into it, and then wherever you're doing console log, you can use the code that I provided to you, okay? So let me just walk you through it. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I just created another directory. And so I just create in this directory, and I'd call it index.html. And this does need to be your file name. I'm going to do, there we go. So I'm using those built-in editor tools to make my life easy. Coming down here, I'm going to do a div. Oh, I'm up in the top, so I don't want to do it there, right? So I'm going to do a div. In this case, let's just do a div so you can see just a straight div, right? And then on here, I needed an ID equal to output. Now, you can name this something different, but the key is going to be when you use my code for outputting to the page, you got to reference whatever that is. So that was one thing. The other thing is you have to have a script, right? Script tag. The source is going to be equal to, in this case, the editor is trying to help you by saying, oh, there's your simple object.js. Cool, right? So I've done that part. And now what do I need to do? Over here, and I could just grab the code that I showed you, right? I think in here I actually did it, yeah. So I'm going to grab this code, copy here, right? So in this case, I'm going to go back to my JavaScript file, which is, oh, I closed it. I must have closed it. Here we go, right? So I'm going to paste that in. I'm going to change this to const because really functions should be const. We can get into this soon, I think already. But now, what do I need to do? So what I can do here, right, is I can, instead of calling console log, which would totally work if I was just doing node, right, and then running simple object, right? So that would totally work just to reference, there's my object and there's my property called name, and then it just outputs that. But if I want that console log to go to the web page, I got to do something just a little bit different, okay? So what I do here is and you could do it above, but I think it just makes more sense below, is I would call display on page, which is the function, and I would pass it my object.name. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm just using this function to output to the page. Okay, and wherever I normally do a console.log, I just pass it. Now this could be for whatever, wherever you have done a console.log, you can display on page. Now, I see an error about why it won't work already, but let's just see it. Okay, now live server, GitHack is just a way to allow us to see the web pages, right? Right now, we can see that there's nothing here. And you might wonder, well, why is that? There's no output on the page. If I go over to sources and I look at object, I'm like, okay, everything's here, but oh, look, there's an error. And on the console, there's an error. It's like, if you scroll up, it's generally towards the top that you can look at it. I can't promise, that's probably not a good one. Oh, here we go. It can't append child on display page. Okay. So here's what the issue was, is that when I brought my code over, I said, and we learn this code soon, but I reference document get element by ID, which points to this ID right here. So I have to make them consistent because this is running code that actually is going to point to that place in the web page, something called a DOM. If you haven't heard it, you will. And so it passes this object into this function. It declares a P tag, creates it. Then it says whatever's being passed into it, which in this case is my name, right? It's going to just do a P tag here. We could say, all right, now look at the DOM and then just append that. So by changing that, and you can already see it because of my live server, right, has already outputted. It's a little hard to see here, but you can see it outputted here. And by the way, if I wanted to make that actually larger, I could do H1 here, okay? And then it would be larger because an H1 would be larger than a P tag, all right? So now that's just using objects, right, to output something. The thing we also learned last night that many of you didn't get, or you handle it maybe a little different way, was actually to write, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to display on page, okay? This time I'm going to write a function, right? Now, we can just copy this over. I could just totally copy this over because now I'm going to be using this as a method. So how would I then, where here I'm calling display on page, passing it that object, how do I do that here? Okay. So there's a couple things. One is that we are, when you're doing it down here, passing in the object reference. So in here, we would have to do this a little different to get the same output. And you might know what that is. We'd call the this variable. Okay, I could totally do that. Now, I don't want to complicate the example because I want to keep it simple. So how would I actually do this? Could I do, and this is actually how I'd do it. I would do my object because I reference the object, and on the object is a method called display on page. Okay, and now I'm just going to pass it that. Now I could pass it the other one, But again, I'm just trying to keep the example easy, right? So now, instead of calling the function that's setting out here, I'm calling the method that is on the object, okay? Right here. Now, this is a good way to organize things, and it's a way that we can, going forward, you can choose whether or not you want to do it this way. But in our case, the last step you needed to do was not the step that I saw most people have struggle with. If git hack didn't work, it was probably because you didn't have this piece right, not because git hack itself didn't work. That's what happened with the student who reached out to me. And it was because of the way they were writing and referencing this function, both from the web page, not giving it correct ID and not passing it. And some people put the code in here, and just by adding the function, you won't get the output. You actually have to invoke it or call it. Okay, let's see. Did that help explain that? I could go ahead and take it all the way git hack for sure, but that wasn't the problem I saw people having. And by the way, you're gonna get to use this because you have to get hack working, and it's really not, again, git hack. It's actually using the code correctly to output whatever you would normally do on console log. So you're going to have to do it for dev 0 and really for ongoing basis until we learn more about how to use JavaScript to update the DOM. And really, we could call this document object model. Right now, we could call it just a web page, the content of it. This is why, again, you're going to learn this as we move forward, what all this code is really doing. And for now, you can just kind of use it as a black box to get some content out. But you could also start playing with, if you wanted different formattings here, you could do that as well. There's all kinds of stuff you could do to make your output, right? I mean, really, and I think I saw somebody doing this. You could also just pass if you wanted some lines, right? So if you wanted just some lines in your output, you could do that as well. Okay, so I hope that clears up anything that may have confused. Let me go back to the Canvas page. I saw your feedback, and many of you are actually trying to develop a schedule for yourselves to allow you a little more time to focus on this class and not doing it at the last minute. I get it, because trust me, when I code at the last minute, it's probably not going to be great output. But the other benefit, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm okay with that, is that the other benefit to coding ahead is that you can reach out to help, and you and I can have a chat about what's going on in your code. Okay. All right. So coming into week 5, we have one more week until our first dev. You do have git hack again for next week. We look forward just a little bit here, right? Yeah, so this week we make another big jump of arrays and loops. Really big concepts to cover. That's why we cut section 6 into 2 weeks. Okay, all right, have a great weekend. Peace.